Robertson on the story for us. He's on the ground in Kabul. Nick, thank you. My next guest writes, and I quote, "If the Taliban persists in its defiant attitude and disregard of international expectations, even its closest allies would be forced to distance themselves from it, leaving Afghanistan alone on the international arena. And the price of this isolation, as always, will be paid by the common Afghan." Well, Ubaidullah Bahir is a lecturer of transitional justice at American University of Afghanistan and joins me now via Skype from Kabul. And I want to talk about your teaching in a moment. But when you say closest allies, who are you referring to? And just expand on how you see international legitimacy for the Taliban actually manifesting itself going forward.
Hi, Becky. Thank you for having me. So the Taliban patrons are very well known within the region. There are multiple countries that were supporting the Taliban movement financially and through safe havens. The issue right now appears to be serious in a way where a total victory was going to guarantee that the Taliban were going to claim more agency and be more defiant even to their closest partners. And it seems that they are reaching out to much larger partners such as Russia and China to support their project. As to what the international community's engagement with the Taliban looks moving forward, it's a decision to make between a rock and a hard place. It's a very difficult situation, a dilemma, because the international community, as much as it would want to engage with the Taliban, there are actions that the Taliban are showing, there are policies that they're rolling out that are in complete defiance of international norms and standards. So that would push in the international community to put a blanket sanction on the Taliban and refuse to recognize them. Again, that itself is problematic. It is easy for your moral satisfaction to think that you have done something about the Taliban, but the tougher and saner path is to engage with the Taliban in whatever limited capacity is possible for the common humanity that we share amongst us and in the world.
You have a unique perspective. Your grandfather is a former Mujahideen fighter. We've got some pictures of you with him as a child. He's now among the senior political figures in the country, attempting to shape this post-US government. What's his role? And is it clear to you through any conversations that you have had with him how this new government will rule?
Again, there is inconsistency between what was said and what was done. Again, the Taliban never officially negotiated any power sharing with political stakeholders within Afghanistan, including Mr. Hekmatyar. Mr. Hekmatyar, along with Karzai, ex-president, and Dr. Abdullah, had created this committee for cohesion and coordination. And the idea was to grant the Taliban some sort of veneer of international legitimacy and democratic transition of power. Since there was a political vacuum in Afghanistan, they wanted to negotiate with the Taliban. And before the Taliban could take over Kabul militarily, that some sort of agreement between the political elite and the Taliban would have taken place. However, due to the security vacuum, the Taliban deemed it necessary to march into Kabul, which nullified the whole concept of the coordination committee. However, the Taliban, despite having repeatedly reiterated even to the media that they would form an inclusive government, seem to have preferred to mend the possible fractures within their own movement and see the ministries and the cabinet as spoils of war that were to be distributed amongst commanders based on their contribution to the war.
You've alluded in some of your writing to certain strife within the Taliban group, and Nick Robertson reporting today that it has been denied that Baradar, for example, is either injured or killed. I mean, those reports, that denial coming because of significant reports doing the rounds on social media. Just explain what you meant and what you understand to be the discord within the group.
You have to understand the original structure of the Taliban to understand the problem that they faced while forming governance. So the Taliban are a fluid insurgency. They were a loosely affiliated group of splinter cells that were working towards a common goal. That meant that different territories were held by different groups within the movement. Even Kabul is under one specific group's control right now, which meant that once they got to government, which was a surprise even to them, and the lack of homework done beforehand, because you know how sometimes you are passive towards your issues and wait for it to face you in order for you to address it. So the Taliban as well, when they sat down, all these different groups obviously had expectations of being rewarded for the efforts that they had put into the fighting. And the difficult decision was, how do you turn a group that is so loosely affiliated or linked to each other to one cohesive entity that can run governance or have consistent policies? And that's why you're seeing extrajudicial killings and justice taking place in different provinces, because those are different groups enacting their own forms of justice.
Tough to stand those up. We're doing our best, but there are certainly lots of reports of retribution and retaliation for those who have fought against the Taliban in the past. Look, you are a lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan. There have been some changes to teaching practices and to curricula. Can you just explain what changes and what's changed on a daily basis? And where does a Taliban government leave your profession, the teachers, the students? What's your sense at this point?
Look, I'll take a step back. And there was a discussion that we were having amongst ourselves. A few academics had gotten together, and we were trying to figure out as to what to do moving forward. And one of the suggestions was that we engage with the higher education ministry and have a discussion with regards to how their new policies are problematic and are limiting access to education. The problem is, such an assumption hinges on the idea that the Taliban are willing to have a dialogue with regards to their policies, and that their policies aren't top down, and these are ideas that have been accepted across the board, and they're addressing the lowest common denominator. That's the most radical Taliban fighter and his vision of the world. That being said, that means that a lot of people are disheartened. We've seen a lot of actions from the Taliban side that they later said that they would address, and the culprits would be arrested, but the message already goes out. Example, the beating of the journalists. Even if they say that it was a mistake and those who are responsible will be brought to justice, the message, the fear has been sent out, has been delivered. With regards to education, we've started online classes already with one of the private institutes that I'm with, and we're barely getting 30% of our attendances. And the students, especially the female population, are extremely disheartened because they don't understand A, the utility of moving forward with the education, B, most of these women were employed by the government, something that they do not see happening, meaning they wouldn't be able to afford their education as well. So the spirits are generally very low, and we're trying to maneuver around whatever policies the Taliban throw at us, meaning we're doing online classes now to avoid the segregation thing as well.
How comfortable are you in staying? Will you stay? I mean, so many of your colleagues and friends will have left the country. I mean, in the past, you've clearly enjoyed some sort of privilege given your background. I mean, does that stand you in secure stead going forward, or will you also leave?
I mean, we all hoped, those of us who stayed back, that the Taliban would have it in them to understand their own limitations, know that they cannot run government unless they consulted with those within the country who had some sort of experience. But looking at how things are moving forward, looking at how governance is being viewed and their approach and stance on civil liberties, it makes things very difficult. It means that probably the only thing left for us to do is to encourage the youth to have some sort of discourse and at least mentally be able to understand that it's okay to live in a society and not be pro-Taliban or anti-Taliban, but be an Afghan citizen who wants Afghanistan to do better, who wants to move towards reconciliation. And obviously the fear is there because even if the leadership doesn't want to take action, there will be a fighter out there who is armed, who has a sense of entitlement, who thinks that he is better than those who were in Kabul and serving a godless regime to exercise their form of justice. You're seeing all the extrajudicial corporal punishments happening on the roads of the cities. And it's just once you've face to face, not only with that physical pain, but that social shaming as well, is there much left to stand for or stand by?
It doesn't sound as if you are particularly optimistic about staying in the country. I mean, stay or go. Will you leave?
I mean, as much as I love this country, as much as even the thought of leaving it haunts me, if my voice can achieve something, that voice is better existing than the counterfactual of it being subdued. So if I can only do that from outside Afghanistan, then maybe I will. But for now, all cards are on the table, and we're holding on to that bleakest hope, in hoping that it doesn't take too long for the Taliban to understand that they are headed straight into a failed state, and that there is much that has to be done and addressed in order to avoid such a future, including 97% of the population facing poverty. So we're here. We never served the previous government. We're not going to serve the Taliban. We served our country. We served our people, and we will do that till our last breath.
With that, we're going to leave it there. We wish you the best. Thank you, sir.